Okay, so this is seminar 4. Seminar 4 is, so seminar 3 we did weighted average cost of capital with growth, because there was growth, there was like a percentage increase, which meant that the dividends increased by a percent, so that we were using the Gordon growth model. So this time, calculate the weighted average cost of capital. So we have to do WACC again, but this time there is no growth. It just tells you there's two companies, one's Grantham PLC, okay, and this is entirely equity finance. So it means that this company has no debt whatsoever. It's basically financed all by equity. And we have a second company, Churchill PLC, which has equity. It's a geared company, so it has debt. It has equity, 500 shares, market value of £1, and it has debt as well. It has 600,000 irredeemable bonds. We've looked at irredeemable bonds before. And both companies generate annual earnings before interest and tax of 120,000. So they have earnings of 120k each. Both have 120,000, and they don't want to. They can distribute that as dividends, and also there is no corporation tax. So before we're looking at corporation tax, this one there's no. These companies aren't affected by corporation tax at all. And so this paragraph here we leave it until later. It's for like C or D, question C or question D. So question A, weighted average cost of capital for both companies. Calculate weighted average cost of capital for both companies. We have one company as Grantham, one company as Churchill, and the differences between the similarities, they both have 120,000 earnings, annual earnings. They both have 120,000 before interest and tax, but the difference is Grantham is entirely equity financed. Everything is equity. Churchill has equity and it also has debt. Okay, so weighted average cost of capital. So this time, weighted average cost of capital. Same idea. Cost of equity multiplied by equity over debt plus equity, and our debt. So cost of debt multiplied by debt over debt plus equity. Same idea. So this time we only have two. We only have so this time, before we had like 3. This time it's only 2. This is because we have equity, and for one of the companies we have debt as well. We have irredeemable bonds. So that's the debt that we're going to look at. So the formula pretty much is similar. No crazy changes with the formula. Just it's not 3 this time, it's 2. But our cost of equity is going to be different. So okay, so there's two companies. There's Grantham PLC and there's Churchill PLC. And let's look at Churchill first, because Churchill has debt. Grantham is actually really simple. Churchill has debt. Churchill PLC has debt. So we'll look at them first. So okay, so Churchill PLC. Okay, we want to work out their cost of equity. So you want to work out their cost of equity, and basically you have to know, because we're not looking at growth, because there's no growth. We're not looking at the Gordon growth model. Instead, we're looking at the idea that cost of equity equals formula. Cost of equity equals dividends per share divided by market price per share. Okay, and they don't give us the dividends in the question, so we have to work out dividends. So dividends per share equals your earnings minus debt. For one of the companies we have debt, for the other one we don't. Earnings minus debt divided by number of shares. These are the two formulas that we're going to use for cost of equity when we're looking at Churchill PLC. So no more Gordon growth model. If there's no percentage increase, we're using these two formulas. We're using cost of equity equals dividend per share divided by market price per share. And then they don't give us the dividends per share. So we're looking at dividends per share equals earnings minus debt divided by number of shares. Okay, so Churchill PLC, let's work out the cost of equity for Churchill PLC. So first of all, we're going to look at this formula so that we get dividends per share. So then we can put it into this formula to work out cost of equity. So we'll start off here and then we'll get to this bit. So earnings minus debt. So Churchill PLC, geared company, 500,000 shares, current market price of £1, 600,000, this is their debt, 600,000 of 8% irredeemable bonds, currently quoted at par. Par means nominal value, so market price is the same as nominal value. And both companies generate annual earnings before interest and tax of 120,000. So this is it. This is earnings. So we're looking at dividends per share, earnings minus debt divided by, so dividends per share equals earnings minus debt divided by number of shares. Well, we know our earnings is 120,000. They've given us that. For both companies, earnings before interest tax 120,000. So for Churchill, 120,000 minus any debts. Well, we know that they have 600,000 of 8% irredeemable bonds. So to work out how much this debt actually is, what we're doing is 600,000 times by 8%. So we're getting our earnings, 120,000, and we're going to take away 600,000 times by 8% to get rid of our debt, so we only have earnings left. So 120,000 minus 600,000 from the irredeemable bonds multiplied by the 8% that they gave us, 8%, all divided by number of shares. Number of shares for Grantham PLC is we're looking at Churchill. Okay, so Churchill PLC, number of shares is 500,000 ordinary shares. So divide it by 500,000. So dividends per share for Churchill is, so we're doing 120,000. Can you do it like this? Okay, so 120,000 minus 600,000 times by 8%, so 0.08. Okay. Get the top bit done first, so sort out the brackets. Okay, 120,000. 120,000 minus the 600,000 at 8%, all divided by number of shares. We have 500,000 shares for Churchill PLC. 500,000 ordinary shares equals 0.144. So dividends per share equals 0.144. So we know our dividends per share. Now we can sub this in to work out our cost of equity. Cost of equity equals dividends per share divided by market price per share. So our cost of equity equals our dividends per share, 0.144, divided by the market price of the share. So for Churchill PLC, we have 500,000 ordinary shares, market value of £1. So this is our market price per share, £1. 500,000 shares with market value of £1. So 0.144 dividends per share divided by 1 equals 0.144. So our cost of equity equals 14.4%. That's our cost of equity. So we know what our cost of equity is, and we're looking at Churchill PLC. So we know what our cost of equity is, but we need to work out what our total equity is. So total equity for Churchill PLC, total equity for Churchill Churchill PLC is a geared company, currently market £1. So they have 500,000 ordinary shares at £1. So that means we're doing 500,000 times by £1 to get our total equity. So we have 500,000 shares at £1 per share. So that equals 500,000, and that's our total. That's our total equity. So now we have a cost of our equity. We have our total equity. Okay, and then debt plus equity. We leave that until the end, and let's look at Churchill's cost of their debt and their total debt. So Churchill cost of debt. Okay, cost of debt. We know that they have 600,000 8% irredeemable bonds. That's their debt. 600,000 8% irredeemable bonds. And the way we do this, and there's no tax, so we know that neither company will be liable to corporation tax. So 8%, currently quoted at par. So nominal value is, in this case, £1. So, and 8% is basically 8p, coupon amount 8p. So 8p over nominal value, par is £1 basically. So 8p over 100. So cost of debt, normally I'll write it out so we know what cost of debt is. Cost of debt is coupon amount divided by your market price of bond or share or whatever. So our cost of debt in this case equals 8p, that's our coupon amount, divided by 100 pence, £1, equals 8 divided by 100, 0.08. So our cost of debt is 8%. That's our cost of our debt. Our cost of our debt is 8%. And now we need to work out what our total debt amount is for Churchill PLC. Total debt amount for Churchill. Well, we know that they have 600,000 irredeemable bonds, okay, currently quoted at par. So 600,000 at 8% irredeemable bonds. So nominal value is £1, okay, and it's quoted at nominal value. So what this means, so typically what we would do is we do 600,000 total amount divided by the nominal value times it by the market price. And because it's currently quoted at par, it's telling you that it's quoted at nominal value. So market price is nominal value. So we're doing 600,000 divided by £1 equals 600,000. And 600,000 times by the market price, which is £1, equals 600,000. So our total debt is 600k. And now, for Churchill PLC, we have a cost of our equity, we have our equity, we have the cost of our debt, and we have our debt. We want to work out our debt plus equity. So our debt plus equity is just our total equity, 500,000, plus our total debt, 600,000. So debt plus equity equals 500,000 plus 600,000, which equals 1,100,000. So now we can start doing our WACC formula. So our cost of equity, we worked out the cost of equity was 14.4%. So 0.144 multiplied by the equity, total equity amount, 500k, 500,000 over the total amount, 1,100,000. Get a value for that. Our debt, total debt amount, our cost of our debt is 8%. 0.08 multiplied by our total debt amount, which is 600k, 600,000 over debt plus equity, 1,100,000 equals, get these two values, add them together, and that's our weighted average cost of capital for Churchill. So, okay, so 0.144 times by 500,000 divided by 1,100,000 equals 0.0654. 0.06, okay, 0.06545, okay, and the lower bit, which is 0.08 multiplied by 600,000 divided by 1,100,000 equals 0.043636. Okay, so 0.043636. And then we add these two together. So our weighted average cost of capital equals, add those two together. So 0.065445 plus 0.043636 equals 0.109. So it equals 0.109. So our weighted average cost of capital is 10.9%. That's our weighted average cost of capital for Churchill PLC, the company that has debt, Churchill PLC. Okay, but they're telling us calculate the weighted average cost of capital for both companies. So now what we want to look at is Grantham PLC. So Grantham PLC is entirely equity financed, so it has no debt. So it has 800,000 shares at current market price of £1.20. And basically the rule is if the company doesn't have any debt, if the company is entirely equity financed, the weighted average cost of capital equals the cost of equity. So if the company has no debt, the weighted average cost of capital is the same as the cost of equity. So cost of equity so we're looking at Grantham PLC. And again, our cost of equity equals dividends per share divided by market price per share. And our dividends per share equals earnings divided by number of shares. So okay, so for Grantham PLC, looking at Grantham PLC, our dividends per share equals our earnings. And we know both companies generate annual earnings before interest and tax of 120,000. Okay, and we have no debt, so we don't have to take anything away from the 120,000. So 120,000 divided by number of shares. So Grantham is entirely equity financed, 800,000 ordinary shares. So number of shares 800,000. 120,000 divided by 800,000 equals, so 120,000 divided by 800,000 equals 0.15. And our cost of equity equals dividends per share 0.15 divided by market price per share. What's our market price per share? Grantham PLC, entirely equity finance, 800,000 ordinary shares, current market price of £1.20. 0.15 divided by £1.20 equals 0.15 divided by £1.20 equals 0.125. 0.125. So our cost of equity equals 12.5%, and our weighted average cost of capital equals the same amount, 12.5%. And that's the answer. So we know that the weighted average cost of capital for Churchill PLC, our weighted average cost of capital is 10.9%, and the weighted average cost of capital for Grantham PLC was 12.5%. So that's question A done. And then question B, part B says, well, suggest reasons why these costs differ for each company. So they're saying, well, why is the cost of equity, why are both companies' cost of equity is different, and why are both companies' weighted average cost of capital is different? So we found out that Churchill PLC's cost of equity was 14.4%, equaled 14.4%, whereas Grantham PLC cost of equity equaled 12.5%. Okay, and this is our cost of equities. But then when it came to weighted average cost of capital, Churchill PLC's weighted average cost of capital equaled 10.9%, and Grantham PLC's weighted average cost of capital equaled 12.5%. And so the question is really why is Churchill PLC's weighted cost of equity higher? And the idea is Churchill PLC's cost of equity was higher, 14.4%, and compared to Grantham 12.5%. The cost of equity was higher because Churchill had debt. So because they had debt, it meant there was higher financial risk. So because they had debt, there was higher financial risk, which meant that their cost of equity was higher. But when we're looking at weighted average cost of capital, their weighted average cost of capital was lower. And that's because the idea is, in terms of cost of equity, if you have debt, it's high risk. So your cost of equity is going to increase. But in terms of weighted average cost of capital looks at it oppositely. So weighted average cost of capital argues that if a company is entirely equity financed, like Grantham PLC was entirely equity financed, it means that it's more expensive. It's more expensive to be equity financed. And the argument is that in terms of weighted average cost of capital, the argument is that because Churchill PLC has some debt, it's cheaper. So because it's cheaper, the weighted average cost of capital is lower. And because being completely equity financed, the weighted average cost of capital, it's more expensive. Being entirely equity financed is more expensive, which means your weighted average cost of capital is going to be higher. So that's it. So cost of equity is higher because borrowing is more expensive, because borrowing is high risk. So your cost of equity is higher because borrowing is high risk, but your weighted average cost of capital is lower because it's cheaper to borrow. So if you're going to be entirely equity financed, it's more expensive. And that's it. And that's basically questions A and B. And then question C is probably the next video, but question C is a bit longer and kind of complicated, but it should be okay.